While I agree with the original direction of Project Orion, even then they recognized the need for non-traditional forces to remove the budding dissident leadership in the outer colonies without massive carnage. Their methodology was unsettling. Amateurs, led by uninformed career military. Orion candidates were volunteers from various UNSC special forces, men and women who were undoubtedly qualified for any military assignment. But they were much too old to undergo genetic augmentation. Inserted gene sequences led to subminimal target changes while the immunosuppressants failed in most subjects, causing rampant, irreversible genetic fragmentation and degenerative conditions. Refinement. Next-generation candidates must have more malleable, robust DNA structure, repair enzymes, with satisfactory testing of L-DNA hydroxyl repolymerase. The most suitable candidate would be prepubescent. Orion candidates' genetic screening was wholly inadequate. Refinement. Generation 2 genetic selection criteria are astronomically improbable. Statistically, over 39 billion DNA records are required. The largest DNA database is currently the CAA's Outer Colony Vaccination Program. Colonists tend to avoid registering births and deaths, and even paying taxes. But they eagerly milk the Free School Vaccination Program, which regularly catalogs DNA traces from disposed injectors. Deconvolution techniques can now reconstitute the entire base pair sequence from such a trace. And I intend to recalibrate my selection criteria to look for markers that will expedite the sifting process. Many Orion candidates exhibited post-traumatic stress disorder or repressed insurgent sympathies. Some in the latter category refused to participate post-augmentation and were incarcerated. Sympathies of this sort are likely dormant in most outer colony citizens. On some level, we all identify with these colonists. The CMA relentlessly churns out propaganda about the noble pioneers. More pointedly, these are the very people we are fighting to protect from a nascent civil war. Refinements. Total indoctrination is required. Not the brainwashing, however, suggested by several of my counterparts in the intelligence community. This requires persuasion and acclimation, a lifelong training commensurate with the import of the Generation 2 Orion mission. Our most efficient agents will be those who thoroughly understand and embrace their orders to forge a new breed of Orion soldiers into unrivaled human weapons. We must maintain absolute control over them. Summary. Criteria involving genetic flexibility, a statistically improbable set of DNA markers, and a decade of indoctrination and training leads me to one conclusion. The ideal candidates are children. My logic is sound, but ethic and moral ramifications linger. So much to reflect on. I need time to think. Substitute Generation 2 Orion with something more inspirational for my military counterparts. They do love their code names. Titans, Argonauts, Odysseus, Olympians, Zulu, Kronos, Promethean, Armor, Nemesis, Daedalus, Hercules.
In this entry, Dr. Halsey looks at a predecessor program, the Orion candidates, of which we now know that Sergeant Avery Johnson was actually a candidate. She looks at various augmentations and alterations that were made to the Orion candidates, but also quite quickly ruled out the usage of quite a few of them. because they resulted in genetic fragmentation and various degenerative conditions. She quickly realised that the next generation candidates that she wanted to bring on board would have to have a more robust DNA structure and repair enzymes, so their ability to self-heal to the augmentations and alterations that were made to them would have to be that much higher than your base level human genetics. She then realised that in order to do so, that gave her the constraint of certain genetic pools of which she could actually use the candidates from to give the augmentations to in the first place. She then simultaneously recognised that the largest DNA database that's currently known is the CAA's Outer Colony Vaccination Programme. Funnily enough, this is actually something that I've recently covered in my human casualties breakdown collaboration that I did with Halo Canon, where we were looking at the various casualties from both the human and the Covenant side of the war. And one of the things we referenced was this database of DNA profiles. We accepted that it seems to be quite widely accepted that a quote in this particular section seems to have been misinterpreted to give the estimated populace of humanity just before the war started at 39 billion DNA records required. But the more I've thought on it, the less I feel convinced that that is actually what she was referencing. If you consider that she realised that she needed to use children as candidates, this 39 billion DNA records that are required, why would she want to look at the DNA records of any other group of people other than children? That immediately implies that there are at least 39 billion children on this record. Suddenly, the population of humanity seems drastically larger if you consider that only children numbered 39 billion. And I think in the collaboration that myself and Halo Canon did, we figured it was around 50-ish billion for human populace before the war. If you haven't seen that collaboration, I'll put links in the description, because the way we actually went about trying to find out the populations of both human and Covenant before and after the war and the casualties that were inflicted as a consequence to the war was actually quite interesting and quite enjoyable to experience, so I'll put the links in the description. Going back to this particular journal entry, Halsey also recognised quite quickly that a lot of the Orion candidates exhibited post-traumatic stress disorders and a lot of repressed insurgent sympathies, basically sympathising with the insurrectionists and their desire to supersede the UNSC. In fact, in some cases, once they'd actually been given the augmentations, they refused to participate any further. As a consequence, most of these candidates were immediately incarcerated. She recognised that sympathies of this sort are likely dormant in most of the Outer Colony citizens, and as a consequence, the idea that she's now embarking upon creating a super soldier program that will dwarf all others before it and make soldiers so powerful and so useful in warfare that if they were to turn against the UNSC would mean most likely the fall of the UNSC, and as a consequence recognised that the need for indoctrination was paramount. By indoctrination, although the implication is brainwashing, it is actually just teaching into the young candidates that they cannot question orders, that they're trying to instill in them a higher purpose, a higher level of being almost, that they will just blindly follow orders without question and get the job done. Because ultimately, you think how powerful Spartans are. If they suddenly decided en masse to turn against the UNSC wouldn't have a chance. It gave her a lot to think on, and the stark and rather powerful realisation that the best candidates for it were children did seem to weigh on her quite heavily in ethics and morality. But she needed time to reflect on it and ultimately left that journal entry as it was. Really, when it boils down to it, if it weren't for the actions that Halsey was laying into effect during the process of the realisations of this particular journal entry, humanity wouldn't have survived the war. It's no secret that the Spartans played a massive, significant part in the survival of humanity, chief amongst them being John 117. So, in that regard, I think the ends somewhat justifies the means. Thanks for watching. Stick your comments down below, I look forward to what you have to say. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons: Neek, the Silent Cartographer, Brian, Sebastian, Red Sea, Darian, Stalker of the Realms, Falcon X003, Alvin, DW, Flaming Halo, and the Revanche, the Holders of the Mantle, my glorious Reclaimers, my loyal Metarchs, and all the other patrons that have jumped aboard to support the channel. You guys are awesome, and all of this wouldn't be possible without you. If you like Halo lore discussed to insane levels of detail, hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Be sure to support us on all major social media channels including Discord, and if you really love the channel, consider becoming a member of the channel by clicking the join button down below, or popping over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there. It would mean the world to me and would free up more of my time for me to put into this content and other Halo related goodness. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.